Welcome to CapitolView, where we discuss the latest in state government and politics. I'm Hannah Meisel with NPR Illinois. Joining us this week is Charlie Wheeler, Director Emeritus of the Public Affairs Reporting Program at the University of Illinois Springfield. Thanks for being here, Charlie.
Welcome. It's always a pleasure to be with you guys.
And also here is Raymon Troncoso of Capitol News Illinois. Glad you're here, Raymond.
Thanks for having me.
Since this show was last filmed, we have all seen a pretty damning report about what happened at the state-run Veterans Home in LaSalle, where a COVID outbreak killed 36 residents. That's more than a quarter of the home's population in the fall. The report blames the lack of preparedness, lacks COVID protocols, and general failures to communicate at all levels, both within the home and at the Illinois Department of Veterans Affairs. Governor Pritzker ordered an investigation a few weeks into the outbreak, but 5 months later, the blame is pointing back to him and his hires, because at the end of the day, it's his administration. And in fact, when he was asked about it a few hours after the report came out, Pritzker essentially said he regretted hiring former state representative Linda Chapolivia as state VA director. Charlie, in the many years that you've spent watching state government and the many government screw-ups that you've witnessed, is this among the worst?
I would say it is. And there's a certain, I guess, I don't know if irony is the right word, but when he ran for governor against then Governor Bruce Rauner, Governor Pritzker raised the issue of what happened at the Quincy Veterans Home with the Legionnaire's disease starting, was it in 2015, where there were a number of deaths, and he hammered Rauner for that. And I guess in a way, the issue has come full circle because now he's wearing the jacket for what happened at LaSalle. And while we focus on LaSalle, there were also outbreaks at other veterans' homes of the coronavirus, including at Quincy and at Manteno, and I believe down Nana too. But one of the differences I see is that when everything came out about what happened under Rauner, there was an attempt by the administration to cover it up. Now, I don't think Pritzker tried to cover this up. As a matter of fact, as you said, he really took responsibility for it. One of the things he said about Chapolivia, who he said at the time she was hired, he thought she would be a good choice because she had headed up a House committee that investigated what went on in Quincy. And then he said that if he knew then what he knows now, he would not have hired her because apparently as an administrator, she was just a total flop. And there were other key positions at the home that were left open. There was a lack of communication. It was just totally dropping the ball all the way around.
Right. The report indicated that she was kind of an absentee director. Of course, most directors of big state agencies, they're not involved in the day-to-day minutia of what's going on. They're not supposed to micromanage. They're supposed to see the big picture. But this seemed to be more than that. Her chief of staff, Tony Kolbeck, was left to basically do her job, do his own job, and then do the job of the vacant, as you said, Charlie, a senior homes administrator, which would have overseen these 4 homes. And in that way, of course, things dropped off of his plate when he's doing 3 jobs. And the same kind of thing happened at the home. The infection control nurse was similarly doing 2 or 3 jobs at once, and things started to fall off the plate. So, Raymond, House Republicans especially have said that there is possibly a case for criminal negligence and is asking for more hearings and is asking the Attorney General Kwame Raoul to open an investigation and also the LaSalle County prosecutor to possibly call a grand jury. So we're not going to hear the end of this, and frankly, nor should we. This is not something to be swept under the rug. 36 people died, people who have served this country and were supposed to be guaranteed a safe place to live out the rest of their days. But Raymond, what kinds of political blowback are we already seeing here?
Well, the issue is being used as a cudgel against Governor Pritzker very much in the same way that it was used against then Governor Bruce Rauner for what happened at Quincy with Legionnaire's disease. In terms of criminal negligence, as you mentioned, House Minority Leader Jim Durkin and the rest of the GOP are asking for there to be a criminal investigation by Attorney General Kwame Raoul into what happened at LaSalle. The thing is that there was a criminal investigation at Quincy for Legionnaire's disease. It lasted over 2 years, and it concluded while Attorney General Kwame Raoul was in office, and he decided that there wasn't a case, even though that over 20 people died in that instance, and there was an attempted cover-up, as Charlie noted. It was still determined that there wasn't any sort of criminal liability. So I'm not sure when it comes to what happened at LaSalle, even though there was, a form of negligence, as we've seen in this report, they didn't have proper infection prevention techniques. They didn't have proper training. It was understaffed. There wasn't the proper oversight that there needed to be. Best practices set by the state were being followed, such as using the wrong kind of soap for killing coronavirus. People who were actually positive with coronavirus still showing up to work. All these different violations occurred, but I'm not sure if, given we have a precedent of what happened at Quincy, that there's a case for criminal negligence for LaSalle.
Sure, and I guess we'll see. I mean, the first step would be Attorney General Kwame Raoul actually opening an investigation. But there is still a path for these families to seek damages in the civil route through the Illinois State Court of Claims. In fact, after the Quincy debacle, the General Assembly raised the cap on the maximum collections to $2 million. And so we have already seen one family of a LaSalle veteran who was killed by COVID sue the state. And, I'm hearing from the lawyers that there are at least a dozen more families. And that sort of thing, that keeps this in the news and it keeps it alive and relevant to people. So Charlie, I mean, let's go back to when that cap was raised, if you remember a few years ago. There are some people that said that was a mistake, that $2 million was, too high for a state that's kind of, we don't obviously have the best track record for our finances. I mean, who is to say, is $2 million too high a cap to seek damages from the state with the Court of Claims? Knowing, though, that it's very possible that it would end in a settlement.
Yeah, I think the thing is that you don't necessarily get 2 million. You can't get more than 2 million. And that is a determination that would be made by the Court of Claims. Now, the Court of Claims is different than a normal court. It's provided in instances where the state is at fault, because you really can't sue the state in a regular court of law. Typically, the Court of Claims would handle things like this snowplow driver ran into my car, and there's a lot that come from the Department of Corrections. In a shakedown, somebody stole my radio, that kind of stuff. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there's already been more than 24 suits filed dealing with what occurred at LaSalle. And to go back to what Raymond said, in terms of the investigations, I don't know if you'd be able to get a conviction in a court of law without showing that there was some criminal intent. The statute, as Raymond suggested, deals with negligence. And could you argue that the people were negligent? Yeah, I suppose you could. One of the things that got me was that the report said in the months before the outbreak, no cases had been reported at the home, but there was a lack of planning, lack of training, communication between the agency, home administrators, and staff, despite the fact that COVID was spreading, particularly in congregate settings. And I would go back, as you said before, the director of an agency doesn't deal with the minutia, but on an issue like this, you would think the director would say, holy cow, look what's going on. And I'm in charge of these facilities, and they're all elderly people, and they're congregate settings. Man, I better get on the ball and make sure that my underlings know what to do. And apparently that didn't happen. Now, there's already a couple of investigations that are being started, if I'm not mistaken. Senator Tom Cullerton, who is the head of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee in the Senate, he's going to be calling hearings pretty soon. He was very critical about the report. And in the House, State Representative Stephanie Kifowit of Oswego, who's a Marine Corps veteran herself, she's the chair of the House Veterans Affairs Committee. She's going to hold hearings on the report and put together a comprehensive legislation package to be introduced, if not yet this spring, because there's not much time, then maybe next year. One of the things that she wants to do that I thought was interesting is to put into law a minimum qualifications for the agency's director. In other words, someone who has a background in this kind of work, as opposed to someone who was a lawmaker and happened to sit on a committee that investigated failure in another area. I think if that requirement were in place, Chapala would not have been named the director.
Right, that's a good point. The report says that there was no one in those high levels of responsibility that had medical experience, that had a nursing home experience. The new acting director of the Department of Veterans Affairs, who Pritzker brought on board, I think about a month ago, his name is Terry Prince, and he ran the veterans homes in Ohio.
Right.
So he did a little bit of a media tour last week ahead of the report coming out, and he assured everyone that that many of the changes that were recommended in the report had already been made at the home before the report came out. But Raymond, I thought it was interesting that earlier this week, U.S. Senators Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth, who of course is herself a veteran, they said, well, they wrote a letter to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, and they said, okay, we've seen assurances that things have changed in the home, but we're just asking the USVA to go in and make sure. So Raymond, I mean, people say that there are changes made in, we've seen this before. We've seen this movie before, as the governor likes to say. How can we be sure that changes are really on their way? Like, what kind of accountability do you think that we as reporters and we as the public are going to be able to really see?
Well, I believe, when this problem initially occurred, it was an audit from the United States Department of Veterans that kind of uncovered just how bad the problem was and how faulty, the policies that were put in place at the state level were for dealing with this sort of thing. I think it's probably prudent of our U.S. senators to reach out to the federal government to make sure there's that oversight to confirm, as you said, that these changes have really been put into place. Because after all, as we saw, not necessarily under Pritzker, but under Governor Rauner, when the Legionnaires outbreak happened at Quincy, there was an attempted cover-up. So it's probably necessary that we have some sort of oversight, not at the state level, that confirms these changes have been put into place. And to your question, what can, the public do, what can us as journalists do, is to confirm that those policies are actually there. It's to ask, maybe file some FOIA requests about what has been put into place, what are the necessary policies, not just for COVID, but for any sort of infectious diseases that tends to, populate nursing homes.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Kifowit is also pushing, and I believe it's been approved in the House already, it is now before the Senate, is legislation that would create an independent Veterans Accountability Unit to receive complaints and recommendations from veterans, including residents of state homes, and for that matter, anyone else, and refer problems to the Inspector General. So that would be another avenue to get information about what's going on and get it out in public, where some pressure can be brought to basically remedy the situation.
That's right. Well, he's been gone since January or February, however you want to count it, when then Representative Mike Madigan stepped down officially from the legislature. But of course, former longtime House Speaker Madigan still kind of haunts the Capitol building. He, of course, has not been charged of any wrongdoing, but 5 former lobbyists and executives for ComEd and its parent company Exelon have been charged in a years-long bribery scheme where Madigan has been identified by the feds as public official A. One of those charged was his close confidant, Mike McLean. And this week, during a status hearing, his attorney let slip, or kind of telegraphed, I feel like, that the feds are seeking a superseding indictment, which may, among other things, indict more people involved in the bribery scheme. The Tribune then reported that a few former lawmakers have appeared in front of a grand jury seeking more information about the scheme in just the last week. Charlie, what do you make of this? And are people making the right assumption to leap to, oh my God, maybe Mike Madigan will be charged, or is it way too premature?
I've always been one dealing with those kinds of proceedings is to wait until the U.S. attorney actually says, here's what the situation is. And I'm reminded of, when would it have been? It would have been back in 2006 when the then U.S. attorney asked then Attorney General Lisa Madigan to stop investigating the hiring practices of Rod Blagojevich. They talked about endemic fraud in the hiring practices. So everyone thought Blagojevich is going to be in trouble because of the way they rigged the hiring rules to reward cronies. And lo and behold, when Blagojevich is indicted, it has nothing at all to do with hiring. It's all with him shaking down people for money. So that was just another reminder to me. Don't try and guess what the Attorney General is going to do. A superseding indictment, as you mentioned, can be we're adding more people, or it can be we're bringing more charges against the folks who are already charged. And the U.S. attorney in the case wouldn't say anything further. I believe her comment was, I'm not at liberty to discuss this. And so Judge Harry Leinenweber said an August 3rd date for everybody to come back, and maybe that's when we'll find out whether or not Madigan will go from being public official A to, I guess, defendant number 5 or 6, depending on how you count.
Yeah, we should mention, one of the 4 that were charged in November have pled not guilty, but one of the ComEd officials had already pled guilty back in September. Anyway, Raymond, this happens, it's May. We have just a few more weeks left until the end of legislative session. And one of the major issues that lawmakers are discussing is this big energy omnibus package that, the groups all share who have put forward competing plans. They all say that they want to get Illinois on the path to being 100% renewable energies by 2050 to combat climate change. But they do it in competing ways. And I think it's one of the group that I'm paying most attention to is the union back group, who is basically asking on behalf of Exelon for the state to provide more subsidies to Exelon so that it would not close the 2 nuclear plants that it has threatened to close. And we've also, again, seen this movie before. In 2016, Exelon demanded the state, provide more subsidies so that it wouldn't have to close 2 other nuclear plants. So does this, Raymond, do you think that this new revelation might poison the water or cause people to be a little bit too afraid to go forward? Or do you think that it's everyone's already laid their cards on the table and everyone's made such a deal of this that something has to go forward by the end of session?
I think it's really hard to speculate what's going to occur because, again, there's so many players and we haven't even really gotten into the federal government and all of this. As we know, we've had massive stimulus money coming in from the federal government, which can be used for a wide variety of issues. Doesn't necessarily have to be used for COVID. And on top of that, we have a multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure plan that may also be coming down the pipe from the federal government. So knowing that that could be on the horizon, it might change the calculus of what the governor's comfortable with and what the legislature's comfortable with in terms of funding for infrastructure and energy. I think everyone's kind of laying their cards on the table, but there's other hidden players out there that we don't even have seen what they're going to play yet. So it's really hard to speculate, what kind of negotiations are going backdoor, or what the governor may have heard at the federal level, or what he's expecting at the federal level that could change the calculus of all of this.
That's a good point. And, it is possible that this kind of thing might be pushed off until veto session in October, November. Of course, people wouldn't necessarily be happy about that, but, we don't know when we're going to see the big infrastructure plan that the Biden administration is pushing, passed, and then let alone they have to promulgate rules for, what the states can specifically do with it, and then how much Illinois would see of that money. But that's a good point. But Charlie, a major element of the energy legislation, the governor said it. Most of the groups who are pushing their competing plans have said it, that they want ethics reform to be at the center of this legislation. So, to prevent situations like the feds saying last summer, oh, by the way, for the last 9-10 years, there's been this big bribery scheme going on, from ComEd and Exelon targeting Speaker Madigan. So, what kinds of ethics legislation or ethics measures have we seen? The folks who are negotiating this package say that they want in there.
Well, I think for starters, one of the things that they'll want to do is make it clearer. If you're a lobbyist, you have to register as a lobbyist. The reason I say that is because, according to the scheme as reported by the U.S. Attorney, one of the ways ComEd tried to influence Madigan was to hire people in his operation as consultants to other people who were lobbyists. And they would actually go out and lobby, but because they were consultants, the way the rules are structured now, they didn't have to register. I think that'll be one of the changes that you'll see. I think another thing that's likely to happen is there's going to be some kind of a cooling off period between when you leave office as a legislator and when you can begin to lobby. There'll probably also be regulations dealing with the ability of elected officials to lobby other branches of government or other levels of government. So if I'm a legislator, I can't lobby City Hall, that kind of stuff. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there may be some urgency to getting something done. I think I read somewhere that ComEd wants to know what's going to happen to their nuclear plants sooner rather than later, because apparently within a matter of a month or so, they have to decide whether they're going to order more nuclear fuel for those plants. And they're saying, if we don't get some subsidy, we're going to shut the plants down. And so we're not going to go ahead and order the fuel and in the hopes that we might get the subsidy and then wind up with this fuel with nothing to do for it. I think there's also some credits for renewable resources that are going to expire, I believe, at the end of this fiscal year. So I would guess that the urgency is to get something done. And I believe that the moving parts will kind of come together. There'll be compromises made. ComEd's not going to get everything they asked for in terms of money and the subsidy, but they'll get something.
Sure. And,
And I think we'll see something before the session ends.
They could always come back and do a trailer bill or what's called a trailer bill in veto session if they feel like what they passed is incomplete. And, like Raymond said, we do probably want to see what that federal infrastructure package looks like. But, it'll be very interesting to see how radically, lawmakers want to change how these big public utilities operate in Springfield, because they have been such a huge force, in the lawmaking process for so long. But we are pretty much out of time. I want to thank our guests, Charlie Wheeler, Raymon Troncoso. Thank you for watching Capitol View, and see us again next time.